who has already used API documentations we provide? Okay, not too many, but still some people. Okay, maybe first, before we get started, hey, I'm Lilith, and I was already introduced, but mainly what I do is I hack fancy apps, mainly provided by the government, and I build boring infrastructure. Sometimes out of the data that's falling out of those apps, and sometimes I just build boring infrastructure. And that's why I was invited today. I'm leading a project called Bund.dev. And what we built a federal API portal, which currently provides documentations and API bindings for more than 50 different APIs provided by different levels of the government, from federal level to sometimes even county level. And if you don't know what an API is an application programming interface. So it's basically a way to make machines talk with each other, and it allows you as a consumer of an API to use certain data, especially in real time. So, for example, imagine all of you have already used today government-blind APIs. If, for example, use the Apple Weather app, which over multiple hops in the end uses data which is provided by the German weather agency. Or if you have used Google Maps, which is using in the end data provided by the German, I don't know what's the English word, but it's Bundes für Geodaten. And we all remember during COVID, we saw all those fancy COVID dashboards, and also they got all the real-time data via APIs from the government. And you might also once or twice have read a study which mentioned certain government data being used to analyze certain topics. Often researchers do this with APIs documented by Bund.dev. And just to give you a little idea of how such APIs work, let's pick one of the many ones we have in our list. For example, we have this nice one from the Deutsche Bundestag, where you can figure out what's currently happening inside the Deutsche Bundestag, what kind of speakers are currently speaking in the Bundestag. And we can check this now in real time by just going through the documentation which is provided on Bund.dev, and see there an API endpoint which is called Plenum version 2 in speaker XML. And then we can execute that. Oh, and we can see nobody is currently speaking the Deutsche Bundestag. It's like not a plenary week, I think. But we could also see which are the people in the Bundestag, which might be already a much more relevant information for certain people. Imagine you are building an application where you want to track when people are leaving the Bundestag or who might lose their seat in the next legislation. And there we also see one of the issues with APIs. Some of them are slow. But here, now we have the data of all the few hundred people in the Bundestag with like their name, I think even their birth date, since when they are in the Bundestag, and also some pictures of them and everything you need, which is like their county, why they are, for which they got elected into the Bundestag. So basically all the data you could wish for, machine readable. So you can take this data and you can build your own applications based on it. And that's basically what we do with currently more than 50 different APIs. And those APIs are then used. Why can't I switch my slides here? Let me just reload this quickly. Sorry. So we get support requests from companies and individuals in state agencies. And this morning, I went through our inbox, and I went through the last few weeks and months, and I looked into what kind of organizations wrote us. And that's really a random pick. And unfortunately, most of the support requests we can't answer because we are like a handful of contributors who are like actually reading those emails. If we think that's a particular cool use case, we like to support people in there coming from universities, for example. But if it's like a big organization, we also like, we can't support them. But often they have really interesting use cases. So the Federal Reserve Bank contacted us because they needed data from the trade register, and they had like questions about our API. Or like the Eli Lilly, this big pharma company, contacted us because they needed data about clinics in Germany and they didn't find it anywhere. So they asked us, do we know an API for it? And often those organizations think we are an official federal agency, while we nowhere mention that. Somehow they assume that. Our VRS, which is like one of the big organizations running buses and trains in Germany, and like I think around Frankfurt, they wanted to integrate into their app data about charging stations for like cars. And all those people then come to us when those APIs don't work, when they don't understand the documentation, which we often can fix. We can't fix it. The API doesn't work. Then we take often those emails, forward them to the public services, who are then like, what the fuck, we don't have this API. But in the end, that's what we try to do. And in the end, I'm providing a public service. And as a side note, I'm supporting the German government and complying with European law, because since 2019, there was like a PSI directive, 2019-1024, I think, which basically says that that every government inside the European Union needs to provide data in the category of geospatial, meteorological, statistics, and company ownership publicly as an API. And originally, I think they checked this in 2016, and Germany didn't have anything. And in 2021, it didn't get better. And that was the time when we from Bund.dev came in and built those APIs or extracted data out of data sources. And now you might ask, how did we get there? Because this doesn't sound like a hobby you usually take up. Some of you might remember this guy. Our former Minister of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. He didn't like digital infrastructure, but he liked apps. You might remember also this person, Doro. She also really liked apps. They built many apps. And Scheuer's favorite app was like, so first of all, the good thing about apps is that the data that is inside the apps needs to come from somewhere. Usually there's a server on the other side that provides those apps with data. Usually between those server and those apps, there's an API. And there are ways, the so-called hacker tools, to analyze those APIs. And we take now the Autobahn app, which was like Scheuer's favorite project, and it's got like huge media coverage, basically an app where you can see construction sites on the Autobahn. It's super useless because Google Maps gives you all this data. But in the end, you see me using this app. And then behind, we run a so-called person-in-the-middle proxy. This is basically a tool which analyzes what my phone communicates with the server that is providing all the data to this to this API, via this API. And then we can just take those requests, copy them out, and start documenting them. And that's basically what you need to do to create infrastructure from apps, because those API documentations and those APIs, now many organizations can use in their apps, can use for their use cases, in integrating them in there. And so they can build something useful with it. This Autobahn app was never useful. I mean, no people were using them that actually, and I think it's still maintained. Actually, AKA is still working. I checked this morning. But there was never value out of that, because why should I check like construction sites in a separate app when Google Maps and any other maps or navigation app can give me that? There is just no use case for it. But the use cases of analyzing construction sites or figuring out inside your custom tools where are construction sites on the Autobahn might be much more interesting. Then every navigation app can use those construction site informations, and not only a single app that nobody uses. And there was also another interesting case where this API was really useful, because when the Ukraine conflict started, they officially shut off all the cameras that are on the Autobahn. So traffic cameras were like, before the Ukraine war, publicly you could look into them via this app. And then they told everybody those cameras were shut off so they can do military transports. Those cameras were not shut off. How did we know? Because we had this API and we checked. And so we could notify them about that. So sometimes it's also like critical to check for a country if an API is actually shut off or not, because the work we are doing, any secret service in the world can also do. And if they're actually interested and if they actually would need this data to do some not so nice things. Now you might ask, if this is like quick and easy to document some APIs, why doesn't the government do that? Well, for fancy apps, to get some media coverage. For boring infrastructure and API documentation, nobody's really interested in from public often. So today, in many projects, they don't do it. But what we learned till now is that many people liked this first API documentation. I shared it via Twitter, and people started using it to show like the traffic situation on their smart mirror in the morning before they leave the house, so that they can check do they need to leave the house earlier or later. And I was like, oh yeah, they did something useful with this infrastructure. And from that point on, we came to the idea that maybe there needs to be an entire portal around this. And I took a weekend and I found like eight different APIs, which one of them was this Autobahn API and 7 more. I don't remember which one. I created a Twitter account and a GitHub account to publish this code and the documentation. And we built a landing page that looked pretty much like the prototype web page of the Bund.de that was under beta.bund.de. It was kind of a copy, but you must not use symbols that are related to the government. So don't do that. But everything else, like you can call yourself a federal agency that's not protected, but you can't use symbols. I did a lot of research on that. And 1 weekend later, we had this nice portal with really bad stock image. And that's important because the official pages do it like that. Also, you need definitely always a quote from Markus Richter, our CEO. It's a real quote. And you should not have an imprint because they might otherwise try to contact you. But we also don't track any data. I discussed this with like the respective agency. It's okay. And what I learned, you can get a bit of media coverage with open data, especially if you combine it with things like stealing the entire trade register of Germany and sending it to a bunch of journalists and telling them there are a lot of passports in it. So that was one of the things we did. So we copied like a few terabytes from the German trade register and got free. And we actually wanted to publish it. But then we found so many passport copies and things that shouldn't be in the trade register that we didn't publish it because we didn't find a way to clean the status. And the Federal Ministry of Justice is still searching for a solution there. So till then, we will not copy it again. But after they tell us that they removed all the passports, maybe we can publish it. Also, we got more followers when it was still called Twitter than the official competency center of open data. But nobody knows what those guys are doing. And to sum it up, over the last 3 years, we documented more than 50 APIs. We have more than 100 contributors in GitHub. And for some time, we also monitored those APIs, so checked if they actually, what's their uptime, and when they are down, we could fix the API endpoints. We stopped that at one point because just maintaining the monitoring was a bit too much work. And we also provide like software packages that you can just integrate into your existing tools, mainly for Python. And some people, unfortunately, got sued based on data we stole. So there's like this case, it's still an ongoing lawsuit. I can't talk too much about it, but we provided some software to copy all the geographic data of Germany. And people copied the data and published it on GitHub, and there is now an ongoing lawsuit about that. So unfortunately, not everything's nice. But on a nicer side, what I wanted to make clear here, it's not a shitload of work to do API documentation. This is all the code we need to set up a new API on our side. So it's like for the people who are interested, it's a Terraform script with many, many lines. And if somebody wants to create a new API, they write me a message, and then I write 30 lines of Terraform. That sets up the GitHub repository and everything we need in our infrastructure to create a new API. Documenting such an API, it's just only one endpoint. It's like 20 lines of code. So it's not even really code, to be honest. But so for a person who has done this more often, documenting a new API with 10, 20 endpoints takes like an hour or two. So overall, when you want to document a new API and you are a public service, it will not take you longer than half a day. So it's not that there's super much effort in at least documenting the APIs you build. I understand that it's sometimes hard for them building APIs that are actually so good that they want to document them. But if they document their bad APIs, it's better to have something than nothing. So I can just encourage public services, document your APIs, even if they are bad. And now you think we have documented 50 APIs, and every public service must be happy about it, right? Well, some public services are. So we documented the API of the Deutsche Bundestag and about for their documents, and now there's an official one for that. So they basically copied us. But now it's on Bundestag.de, and we are super happy if public services do that. And when they then do a pull request to link to their API documentation instead of we maintaining the API documentation, we're super happy about that. So you can do that. The first people who did that were from the Federal Environment Agency, or I don't know how to translate their name, but they were the first ones doing that, and then even sending a pull request, I think. So the Bundestag didn't do that, but they just notified us. And then there is like the Arbeitsagentur, and they hate us. And when they first figured out that we document their API, they rebuilt and renamed all the API endpoints within weeks. They started using CAPTCHA inside their apps. That when you want to see like an entry from their data set, you need to at least one time write in this CAPTCHA. And we asked them why they are doing that, and they couldn't give us any legal reason, but they just didn't want that anybody uses like their data treasure. Because I think they tried to sell it via some weird ways. And we didn't like that, but we just updated the API, and we did this since then a few times. And we also provide like some software to like automatically crack those captchas. And we do this for multiple public services by now, but they were like the first ones. And because it's super easy with some AI to do that, so yeah. And when we now go back to like the PSI directive, and basically almost all those categories, we now document the necessary APIs that officially don't exist yet. So I would say we implemented the PSI directive for Germany. Maybe not how they intended it, but at least they know something. And the European Union's people on APIs also invited us already at least once to speak at conferences about what we're doing. So in the end, we showed what's possible, but after showing what's possible, actually the government should do what's necessary. So I'm happy to receive offers to sell Bund.dev to the federal government. But what we would actually need are like laws that are following. So while there is this EU directive on open data, nobody's really interested in Germany, I often feel. And we need to maybe help them in a certain way to provide great APIs. So again, you can buy Bund.dev, and we can tell you also how to write Terraform scripts to do this pretty easily. But APIs are really, in this entire journey of open data, only one of the first steps, because it gets only really interesting when you can link different data sets across APIs. So the keyword for that is linked open data, that APIs can reference each other and so on. I think then open data gets like really valuable and really, really interesting. But we are far from that. And that's already it for today. And if you have questions, yeah, just come talk to me afterwards also. And that were interesting. This is an official sticker set of Dorover.